you?
I never.
Watch your mouth!
You listen to me.
I'm gonna give you to the count of 10 to get your ugly, yellow, no-good keister off my property before I pump your guts full of lead.
The unforgivable.
He's wanted in the state of Kansas, New York, and Philadelphia.
For all kinds of things.
He's always been.
He's a bad guy, Johnny. Ain't no change in it.
Keep the change, you filthy animal.
Good morning. We're going to have some fun. That's going to be some good times here in the weeks to come. We are going to jumpstart a brand new series today called Triggered, and I couldn't be more excited to just unpack all of this content with you. And I will warn you that today is a bit of an intro, and so we're going to sort of set a framework and talk about some definitions together and really set up where we're going to go for the next several weeks. But when we get done with today, there's definitely going to be a part of you that's just like, man, I don't feel like I have a lot of answers. Like, what do I do now? And that is because it isn't all going to fit into one message. And so you need to come back. And so if there's a week that you're going to miss, make sure you catch up online, watch it back on YouTube. Some of these messages you may need to watch a few different times. Some of you have already been informed by loved ones. You will be watching these messages multiple times, and that's okay as well. But I want to encourage you, even today, just to write down some things that stand out to you, some things that help you maybe put some handles or wrap some words around some things that you've felt or experienced before, and that hopefully start a conversation when you leave here. That is the big win, that you're able to talk to the people in your life about what you're learning and wrestling with how you feel about it and maybe what you're going to do with it. And so if you are taking notes today, the title of my message is, I am so triggered. And that's the way you have to say it. Like a girl who's annoyed on TikTok, I am so triggered, okay? Now, I don't know if you've ever had this moment where you have walked up on somebody before and they were losing their mind, they were completely crashing out, and they didn't know you were there, and in the middle of them freaking out, they realized you saw them freaking out, and it was weird for the both of you. Has this ever happened to you before, where you've walked in on somebody and they were just losing their mind? Some of you are like, yes, but I was the one that was freaking out, and somebody walked in on me. But I recently had this moment where I was in a grocery store, and I had like an earbud in, and so I was listening to a podcast, and I was only kind of half paying attention to my surroundings, but I came around this corner, and I started to walk up one of my favorite aisles, which is the chip aisle. Any other fans of chips, and just how many chips, and you're looking at the new chips, and you're like, oh, okay, I didn't know they combined those flavors, I like that. And I'm looking at these chips, and I hear this like commotion down the way, and I look, and there's a mom, and she's got 3 kids with her. One, I can only assume he's the most ADD one. He's strapped to the cart itself. I only know that because we used to do that with our ADD kid. Just tie him to the cart and just pray that they don't know how to undo the deal. And the other 2 were like swarming around the cart, and they kept like sneaking like chips into the cart that she was not. There's probably like 5 bags of chips in the cart, and you could tell maybe they'd done this a few different times because they were kind of laughing a little bit, and she did not think it was as funny as they did, and they were sneaking things in, and then she was boiling over, and I only caught it because at the very, I looked over, and she grabs one of the bags, she's like, would you guys just come knock it out? And she throws the bag of chips at the chip wall, and it makes like a dent where all the other chips were, and she's like, no chips for anybody, you know, and then as she's saying that to them, she turns and she sees me, and I was like, you know, wave at her, and she knew that she'd been caught, and then I was just kind of like, I'm like, hey, it's, you gonna be okay? And she was like, yes, I'm fine, you know, and I'm like, I get it, I've been there, like we have 3 kids. Honestly, I've been the kid that tries to sneak chips into our cart, and my wife gets mad at me sometimes, so I understand like what's happening right now, like, are you going to be all right? And she was like, yeah, and I could tell she was so embarrassed that she had just totally lost control, and and like the kids are getting the chips out of the bag, and she's like, only one bag, and she looks back at me like, is that an okay response? And I was like, yeah, like, why am I the judge of this now all of a sudden, And one of the kids is looking at me, and I'm like, get the Doritos, you know what I mean? Because I wanted to, sort of disciple him in that way. Doritos is the best chip. And I bring this up because, immediately when I left that situation, I had this thought that I'm a little bit embarrassed by, and maybe you've had this thought when you've seen somebody have a meltdown, whether it's in person or maybe you saw it on a reel online, where you see something and you're just like, whew, I am so glad I'm not like that. I'm so glad that I don't have that thing. I'm so glad I've never, done that thing, and maybe the other people in your life are like, well, I don't, I mean, sometimes you are like that. Sometimes you do have those moments. And maybe you do. In fact, I think there's probably a good chance that you have moments where you completely melt down, where you lose control, where you sort of lose your sense of what's happening and you are overwhelmed and you just react. Maybe it's not to that extreme, but it happens maybe at some level in your life. I think that we all have these interactions that turn us into people that we don't want to be. They cause us to do things, to say things that we don't want to do, things that don't even feel like us. I think there are these moments where we find ourselves hulking out. The Incredible Hulk, right? You've seen enough Avengers movies. He's like a normal guy, and he's fine until something happens, and he starts to get frustrated, and he's like fighting it, and then finally he gives into it, and then he just completely loses control. And maybe you're like, yeah, I've been there. Something happens, and it just hits you, and you try and fight the frustration it's making you feel, but then the anger wins out, and something in you just snaps, and before you know it, you wake up in a field somewhere with some ripped purple pants, and you're like, how'd I get here? You're so confused about what just happened, and you're like, tell me I didn't just destroy another city. And they're like, no, just your relationship with your daughter. Just like your future at this company. You realize that losing control in that moment cost you something. You realize that you didn't just feel out of control, you got out of control. And honestly, I think that this is a very human struggle. I think we are all the Hulk. In fact, I think that's why some of these movies hit us so deeply, is because they're not about these surface things. They're about the issues that we all face, the wrestlings that we all have, the rage that we all fight against. In fact, the Apostle Paul talks about this in the book of Romans, chapter 7, verse 15. He says this, I don't really understand myself. I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do what I hate. But when I do what I don't want to do, I feel like I'm not the one doing it. You ever had that experience where they said or did something and you snapped and you reacted in a way that was out of character, and you know that you were the one doing it? Like, you're aware that you were the one that said that thing, that did that thing, but it felt like it wasn't entirely you. It felt like you weren't in control. It felt like it was coming from somewhere else almost. It was just happening. And I wonder what sorts of things set you off. Is it like whenever she rolls her eyes, you're like, when they question your authority? When they forget to include you again in the text thread with the invite that everybody else seemed to know about? When you just give them a friendly reminder that they asked you to give them and they respond this way? And in that moment, you black out. You know what I mean? Like, you just lose it and you just react. And you can feel inside of yourself, here come the purple pants. You're triggered, right? And this word sort of floats around a lot in our culture, and so I want to just give you a definition to put us all on the same page. A trigger is essentially something that suddenly sets you off. And this could be a lot of different things, right? It could be a word, a person, an attitude, an event, an experience. It could be all sorts of different things, a topic, a song, a smell. But whatever it is, it sets you off and you have this explosive emotional reaction that you feel like you can't control. And the reason that this happens has a lot to do with how your brain works. In fact, triggers take place in what's called the limbic system. It's the emotional or reactionary part of your brain. And this is the part of your brain that is really designed to defend you. And so when you are triggered by something sort of happens that pushes your buttons, you react, and it disables the prefrontal cortex or the logical or reasonable part of your brain, and it just throws you into fight, flight, or freeze, which sometimes for us, it pushes us to respond in ways that we end up looking back and regretting later. We find ourselves thinking once we come down like, oh man, I shouldn't have punched that guy. I mean, he did cheer against my kid in this tournament, but I shouldn't have slapped him in the face in front of his family. That I can see now, that was wrong. I shouldn't have stormed out of that date. I shouldn't have posted that comment. And this is why, when we're triggered, we often sort of look around for someone else to blame for why we did what we did, because the thing that we did feels so unlike us in that moment. It's why we find ourselves being like, you know what? That's not my fault. I just did what I had to do. And if they wouldn't have done this, I wouldn't have had to do that. I'm justified. Because in reality, when you think about it, they're the problem. And this is why we need to stop them from doing this. We need to keep her from ever showing up here again. We need to ban that. Nobody should ever say those things. Like, he can't be allowed to do this. She can't be allowed to wear that in here. And here's the thing, sometimes you're right. Because we do need expectations and boundaries, and we should be considerate of and sensitive to other people. But then there's this other part of you that thinks like, well, wait, but shouldn't we also be able to say who we really are and say what we think? Like, are we just supposed to all deny our true feelings and walk around on eggshells and live in false harmony? Like, where do we draw the lines? There's this tension that we all experience. I think if we're honest, we would admit that we really hate having limits placed on us, but when it comes to our triggers, we have no problems placing limits on other people. We're like, you can't control me. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what language I can't. Don't tell me where I can. And then when we have a problem with someone, we're like, here's what we're going to need you to do. We need to restrict them. We need to change this. We need to do that. We all sort of live with this double standard. And part of it is we think like, listen, if I can just get them to change, I'll be fine. Because they're the problem. And really what we're saying that we don't want to admit out loud is, I have to control them because I can't control myself. I need to control them because I can't control myself. And yet, you are not going to be able to always get your own way. You are not going to be able to control the attitudes, actions, words, and behaviors of every single person around you, and definitely those of everyone on the internet. You can't control these things because you are not a celebrity. You may have a little more influence if you were that, but you're probably not. You're not a Fortune 500 CEO. You're not the king of a small country. But even if you were one of these three things and you had the opportunity to arrange your life in the little protective bubble that you wanted it to be, you would realize that controlling everything around you doesn't fix what's going on inside you. And you already know this because you've seen these people's documentaries. You've seen people that have had the ability to set life up exactly the way they want it, and it still didn't fix all of their triggers. And We actually see that over and over again in Scripture. In fact, I want to read you a story today that illustrates this exact idea. In just a few minutes, we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 18, where we see this story unfold, and it really revolves around these two different people. One named Saul, who is the king of the Israelite people, God's people, and the other is David, who is he's just past his teenage years, just approaching young adulthood. He's a shepherd boy. He's from this big family in the country, and he recently killed a giant that turned the tide of a war. And so Saul, the king, is very grateful to him. They have a good relationship. They see each other as good for one another, helping one another. And in fact, this is sort of what happens from there. This is 1 Samuel chapter 18, starting in the second half of verse 5. It said, Saul made David a commander over the men of war, an appointment welcomed by everyone. When the victorious Israelite army returned home later, women from all over Israel came out to meet King Saul, as they do, right? I'm sure when you come home from work every day, all the women from the city come out and just sing and dance, and maybe not. Okay. They danced and they sang, Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s. And this made Saul very angry. And you wouldn't like him when he's angry. He says, what's this? They credit David with 10,000s and me only thousands? Next, they're going to be making him king. So everything is fine. Everything's good. And suddenly, a song starts. And the song triggers Saul. And now he's mad. And he's mad at everybody, but especially David, who, by the way, has no idea that he's angry or why he would be angry. And this is the first thing I think you should know about your own triggers. Sometimes the people who are triggering you don't even know they're triggering you. You're like, how could they not know? They're doing it on purpose. And they may actually be oblivious. David was. In fact, oftentimes the thing that we're actually being triggered by, they don't even have to know about because it's not even really about them. The king's emotional reaction here isn't really about what David is doing. It's about the assumptions that Saul is making. Saul is reading into the motives of the people singing and dancing. He's reading into a storyline that he's invented about what could happen if this thing proceeds. He's sort of projecting all of these fears that he has onto these other people. And this is the truth about triggers, is that they all originate from inside of us. Every trigger is attached to a trauma. Trauma comes in all shapes and sizes. It's essentially a situation or a moment in which we felt out of control or powerless to do what we needed to do to take care of ourselves or protect ourselves. And triggers import the pain of that past moment into our present experience, and they overwhelm us with unwanted feelings. And it's in that moment that we often just react. And the crazy thing is that we are not all triggered by the same unwanted feelings. There are certain ones we just can't tolerate. We've all had certain experiences that made us feel things that were so disempowering that we were like, I swear I will never, ever have to feel that again. And so anytime that trigger is pulled that surfaces that feeling in us, we find ourselves doing whatever we have to escape it. The protective part of our brain seizes control from the logical part of our brain, and we just react. And I wonder what that feeling is for you. The feeling that you fight so hard not to have to feel ever again. Maybe it's anxiety. Maybe it's vulnerability. Maybe it's betrayal or abandonment. Maybe it's embarrassment. Maybe it's being minimized or manipulated. Maybe it's the feeling of being controlled by someone or something, or being taken advantage of. For some of you, You can tell what it is because when I just read the word, part of you tensed up. You found yourself getting angry, maybe even sick to your stomach, just the mention of the word, because you hate the feeling so much, you would do anything to avoid it. And I get it. I mean, I don't want to feel these things either. But here's the unfortunate reality about being a person in the world. Everything on this list is unavoidable. Like, you will experience everything on this list just by being a human that lives among other humans and is in relationship with other people. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't set up any boundaries in our life or that we shouldn't pay attention to take care of ourselves, but it means this. There is no possible way to arrange your life and schedule to where you never feel anything you don't want to have to feel ever again. You are going to have unwanted feelings. The question is, when they rise up in you, what are you going to do with them? Some of you are like, I hear you saying that like there's no way to arrange my life so I don't have to feel things I don't want to feel, but I feel like I can. Challenge accepted, right? And you keep trying, but it's not working. What ends up happening is like when we're preoccupied with everything that we think might hurt us, we end up not being able to enjoy the people and the experiences happening around us. And this is exactly what happens to Saul in this story. It says this, that like in verse 18, chapter 18, verse 9, from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. He was just preoccupied with him, trying to manage him and keep him at bay and watch out for him because he was convinced that David was going to trigger something in him that he didn't want to feel. And here is the problem with this. Hypervigilance makes you hallucinate. And what I mean by that is your mind starts manufacturing motives and evidence that doesn't even exist. And sometimes for some of us, we are so paranoid for something, we're looking out for it, that we start seeing a mirage of it. Oh, I know what they're doing. I know what they're up to. I can see it. And it's not actually happening. And maybe somebody who is reasonable in your life, who actually has all the information, who's not emotionally involved, who knows the both of you, steps back and tries to actually bring you back to reality, and you instantly accuse them of gaslighting you. Because there's no possible way that what you think is happening isn't happening. That maybe what you are imagining isn't real in this moment. You are importing your past into the present. And you know what Saul saw when he looked at David? Exactly what he was looking for, even though it wasn't there. And we know it wasn't there because Scripture tells us at the beginning of verse 5 that whatever Saul asked David to do, David did it successfully. Like everybody wanted this person promoted because he lived above board. All David ever did was try and serve Saul to the best of his ability. He'd never done anything shady or manipulative or underhanded at this point. But Saul was so triggered by something about David that he was on edge constantly. Everybody around King Saul walked on eggshells. They were all afraid of accidentally setting him off, even though they didn't know exactly what was going to set him off, which made every moment the potential for an explosion. Saul had this way of infecting every room he walked into with anxiety. You knew he was coming because everybody started getting on edge. And I wonder if you have ever been around somebody that sort of created this chaos around them. And you tried to talk to them about it, and they just wouldn't listen to you. And part of you was just like, they are being so unreasonable. And here's what you need to know. They are being unreasonable. You know why? Because this is what triggers do. They take away our reason. They actually disable the thinking, reasonable part of our brain. We are running on emotion. This is why you can't reason someone out of an emotional state. You first have to calm their nervous system. This is why there are times where you are not doing well and somebody is trying to tell you the truth and you can't hear it because the reasons don't matter. The emotions have taken over. And this is what is happening in Saul's life. And none of his men are neurologists as far as we know, but they found this out the hard way, right? Because they're just like, we don't know what to do. This guy is just, how do we calm him down? And this had been happening for long enough to where they're throwing all different sorts of ideas about how to bring him down and not trigger him. In fact, if you rewind this story 2 chapters earlier, there's this conversation that takes place. This is 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 16, says this. This is all Saul's men around. They're like, let us find a musician to play the harp whenever the tormenting spirit troubles you. This is what they've nicknamed it. And he'll play soothing music, and you'll soon be well again. All right, said Saul, find me someone good. Bring him here. I love this whole exchange. They're just grasping at. They're like, maybe music will help? I don't know. And Saul's like, fine, but find me somebody good. There's nothing worse than crappy harp music. That'll trigger me even more. And so they do, they're like, okay, let's do this thing. I can't even believe he said yes to it. They search it up. They find the best harp player they can on Yelp, and they get this guy to come in, and he shows up, and he's like dragging his harp, and he gets in the room, and you guys aren't going to believe this, but when he shows up, they're like, David, oh, good. It's you. And he's like, do I still have the gig? And they're like, yeah. And they're telling themselves, like, maybe Saul won't notice. Maybe everything will be fine. And that's not exactly what happens. It says this in verse 10 at 1 Samuel 18, verse 10, that David was playing the harp as he did each day. So he's been doing this for a while now. But Saul had a spear in his hand. Who gave it to him? No one knows. And he suddenly hurled it at David, intending to pin him to the wall. But David escaped him twice. Twice? Like, how many of you, if your boss tried to murder you, would be like, it was a weird day, okay? I need this insurance package. And you would just go back in like, nobody give him a spear today. This happened to him multiple times. What a crazy situation. Essentially, the music helps a little bit for a little while until it doesn't. And now, instead of actually being able to carry out the actual responsibilities of running the kingdom, everyone around Saul is spending all their time, energy, and effort just trying to manage Saul's emotions. They're just trying to keep him under control so he doesn't lose it and do something that costs all of them dearly. And Saul the whole time is insisting that David is the issue, but everyone who knows Saul well can see that the issue is in Saul. David is just unwittingly triggering it. Because the truth is, your reactions say more about you than what you're going through. They show you where you're being bullied by your unfinished business and what you need to address and process and resolve. And some of us, when a trigger comes up, the first thing we think is, this is why you can't trust them. This is why they're the problem. This is why that's the issue. I wonder if there are people around you that are being like, maybe the trigger is in you. Maybe they just stumbled over it. Some of you are thinking like, man, I agree with all this. This is why I'm so glad I'm not like Saul. I mean, I know who I'm going to send this message to. But this isn't me at all because I don't really blow up like that. You know what I mean? Like I've never, it's just not me. But you should know that there are more than one kind of unhealthy reaction. In truth, when we're triggered, some of us explode and others of us implode. And I wonder what your tendency is to do when you're triggered. Like when you're faced with an unwanted feeling, maybe you are like the outward, ranting, madman, spear-chucking, pin your enemies to the wall type. Or maybe you are the inward, isolating, overeating, log onto a website you said you were done with to numb out type. Let me ask you this. What are your triggers driving you to do? And is it helping or hurting you and those around you? I wonder if you've ever slowed down and asked yourself this question before. Like, what is it that is triggering me? Where I snap and lose control? What is actually going on? And is what I do as a result, is it helping me? Or, I get through what I have to get through, but what damage is it doing in the process? You know what's crazy to me about this story? If you were to read the whole thing, you would discover this, that it actually says in the text that Saul's meltdowns came from God. Isn't that crazy? This is actually what it says. 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 10. A tormenting spirit from God overwhelmed Saul, and he began to rave in his house like a madman. Now, some of you are like, whoa, so God made Saul do all of these crazy things? That's actually not what it says. It says that God actually allows Saul to experience the depth of the trauma and the pain and the unwanted feelings. God allows Saul to be overwhelmed with it, but his reaction to it is all his own. Why would God actually do that to us? Because as it turns out, the Spirit of God doesn't always just help us with encouragement. Sometimes he helps us with conviction. You see, God doesn't always protect us from our triggers because he wants us to process through our triggers. God actually allows us at times to feel and to be overwhelmed by what is going on within us so that we have to stop hiding from it. But we get to decide what we do in that moment. And some of us decide we are not going to face it yet again. We prefer to pretend it didn't happen and hide it and minimize it and excuse it and make really harsh boundaries for other people as a punishment because we're uncomfortable asking the questions, where did that come from? What am I feeling and why? Where did that come from? What am I feeling and why? And when you look at Saul's life, you realize he never really asked these questions. You know who did? David. And this is why I think there are virtually no stories in Scripture of David's toxic trigger responses. Hardly any at all. Because David actually learns to acknowledge and to process and to resolve these things happening inside of him. One of my favorite prayers that David writes out, Psalm 139, verse 23 says this, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you, and lead me along the path of everlasting life." And I wonder when the last time was that you sat and sincerely asked God to let you know what was really the root of what was causing you to come unhinged. I know you're like, they did, and they said, and they posted, and they passed this amendment. But what is it in you that comes unglued when you come face to face with that? When was the last time you sat with God and asked him to introduce you to what is going on deep inside of you? Psychotherapist Dr. David Risho says that we're often triggered by another person because they are pointing out something in us that we don't want to face. That it's actually not them, it's what they're making clear to us about us that we don't want to see. In fact, he says that a lot of the interpersonal triggers that we face, whether in person or online, really come down to three things that they are illuminating to us. Number one, our shadow. And your shadow is the dark traits and impulses that you're not proud of and you don't want anyone to know about. And sometimes that person is drawing attention to what you don't like about you, and so you project your suppressed self-hatred onto them. And you've seen this happen before, right? Where somebody is so upset and like, this is what's wrong, and I can't stand people who whatever, and they're going off and going crazy and losing control, and then you find out 2 years later, that was their thing. That was their issue. That was the thing they couldn't stop themselves from doing. They were being triggered by their own shadow, reflected to them in someone else. The second thing that he says that often triggers us about other people is that they're pointing out our own ego. And your ego is the self-centered part of you that wants what it wants and demands to be deferred to. It is my way or the highway. I want what I want. This is my house. This is my company. This is my department. We do things my way. And we will not be disrespected. Sometimes that person is challenging your sense of authority or superiority, and they're highlighting your inability to get what you think you deserve. And that you cannot stand. And the third thing that it often highlights in us is our early life, which are the formative experiences that shape what feels fearful and shameful to you. And oftentimes it's that person reminds you of who hurt you or who made life hard for you. And so you transfer your distrust or angst from that early interaction onto this person. It's when you see them and you're like, oh, I know you. I know your type. And it's really not them you're upset about. It's your ex-husband. It's your dad. It's that first grade teacher. But oftentimes we don't see this. Like some of you are wondering, like, well, why is this so hard for me to actually see and understand about myself? Why is it that we just tend to skim the surface? And this has been a problem that humans have always had. In fact, one Old Testament prophet words it this way. This is Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9. He says, "The heart is hopelessly dark and deceitful, a puzzle that no one can figure out, but God gets to the root of things." You ever felt like when you were trying to figure someone else out, you were like, you are a complicated puzzle that no one can figure out? I have thought this about my wife many times. But here's the thing, you can't even figure yourself out. When you look inside of yourself to try and figure out why you were doing certain things, that is really hard for you to get to the bottom of because, as it turns out, you were really good at hiding from yourself and blaming everyone else. We all are. You need God to help you identify your own issues, and you do need to do that because the truth is, the triggers you don't deal with will damage those you do life with. And for some of you, the damage is already being done. You have not dealt with the trigger that keeps setting you off or the trauma that it's connected to deep inside of you, and you keep reacting and reacting and reacting, and the ripple effect of that has damaged your relationships. It's estranged you from your kids. It's made things weird with the person you chose to spend your life with. It has pushed you to do things that don't feel anything like you. It's turned you into a person you don't even recognize, and yet you still don't want to face it. But if you don't, it will keep doing damage to the people you love the most. And in fact, some of the damage that has formed the triggers in you is the result of the issues that other people in your life didn't want to deal with. And because of that, they damaged you. And now the ripple effect is being passed on to the people around you and the generation below you. And it is echoing and echoing and echoing. A lot of times we just think it'll go away. I can handle it by myself. And these are lies we tell ourselves that keep us in the dark. Which means you've got some work to do. And the first step is really this: to map your triggers. Because you can't deal with what you're in denial of. You need to sit with God, sit with yourself, sit with the people around you and say, like, what is it that sets me off? I was talking to somebody after first service, and they were like, I don't know if I really have any triggers. I don't think I have anything that sets me off. And her best friend was standing there, and she's like, oh, yeah, you do. And so I just want to let you know, if you are confused, maybe just run this by your family, your spouse, your kids, your coworkers, because they know you sometimes better than you know you, because your heart is pretty deceitful and it can hide things from you and allow you to live on in denial. What is it that sets you off? You may not know why, but let's start with the what. And when you can begin to map this, you can ask the question of, like, where did that come from and why am I feeling this? And I know this sounds really unfun to do, but here's why you should do it. In fact, here's why we're doing this whole thing. Some of you are like, why are we even talking about all this stuff? I don't want to like explore all of the junk that happened in my life. I don't want to unpack like the stuff that like I've pushed it down for a reason. But the reason to trudge it up is this. What we see in Scripture is that God can actually heal you from the things that are silently controlling you. That you do not have to be a victim of all of your unwanted feelings. And for some of you, this is dominating your life. You are being pushed around by all these things coming up inside of you that you don't like and that you've sworn off, and so you push them down, and they continue to leak out and do damage, either through an explosion or an implosion. And you have the ability to partner with God to address these things, to process through them, and to resolve them, to actually begin to grab hold of spiritual practices that once you begin to practice over and over and over again, these things begin to run new neural pathways that empower you to not have to be owned by all the stuff that you're trying to protect yourself from, because it's not working. Only God can surface it, and only God can truly heal it and help you forward. This is what I want for you. This is what God wants for you. This is what the people around you want for you. And I know that at this point you're like, man, I really need more help with this. And this is why we have 4 more weeks. We're going to give you very practical tools, and we're going to help you move forward in a healthy, Jesus-centered way. This is why you need to be here the next 4 weeks. And in fact, it's not just you who needs to be here. There's somebody else in your life that needs to be here too. Probably a few somebodies. And probably the ones that need to be here most are the ones that will realize their need for it least. And so when you invite them, don't just say like, oh man, you know how we all hate you because you freak out a lot and do horrible things and you're mean to everyone? Like, that's not going to win, okay? I would do it this way. You know what? Our church is unpacking this reality that I didn't realize was affecting my life. That we all have these internal triggers that often we are blind to, and I am learning things about myself that is helping me. And man, I think that it might help you in the same way that it's helping me. Would you come and sit with me so we can grab hold of these tools together and grow forward? Help each other, hold each other accountable. Because I don't want to be bullied by my unfinished business. I want to be the one who stops a cycle, who is able to experience something that they don't want, process it with God, and respond in a way that looks like Jesus. This is possible, but it takes surrender. This is what we're going to do the next few weeks. But I want to pray this into your life today, that God would show you what your triggers are and help illuminate to you what you need to face. Would you bow your heads across this room as I pray for you? God, we are so grateful for your love for us. At the same time, we know that Some of us, we have done so much self-sabotaging because there are things that we have done or that have been done to us, and it brought things up inside of us that we don't ever want to feel again. And there was something in us that embedded in the emotional, reactionary part of our brain, this defense mechanism to protect ourselves by exploding or imploding. And yet, we've done it so many times that it's doing more damage than the feeling would ever do if we just faced it. And God, I pray that you would allow us to see what we are hiding from ourselves, that you would search our hearts, oh God, that you would illuminate to us what we are missing about ourselves, that we would stop trying to blame it on everybody else and we would start looking inside ourselves. And God, we would start to see what you are wanting us to deal with, that we would face the conviction. And instead of allowing it to turn us into a madman, I pray that you would allow it to turn us into someone who is curious about what is going on in me. Where is it coming from? What do I do with it? And God, I pray that as we unearth these things and we walk them out with you, as we practice the spiritual tools that you give us in your word to live mindfully in our everyday lives. God, I pray that you would heal hearts, heal families. God, begin to heal people of long-term addictions, that you would begin to piece relationships back together, restore trust, enable people to love again. God, there is so much that cannot be done without you. God, I pray that we would surrender to you during this series and you would do in us what only you can do when we're simply willing to allow you to examine the deepest parts of us. It's in Jesus' name we pray. And everybody said, amen.